How, as human beings, can we take something as small as this human tooth here and make it as big and scary as a saber-toothed tiger? Let me explain how a visit to the dentist demonstrated this. Early last year, I went to the dentist because I was having problems with one of my front teeth. Unfortunately, the only option was to remove the tooth. When we started to talk about potential solutions, the dentist said that because of the bone loss I was experiencing, it was unlikely I could either have an implant or a bridge. And then we started to talk about the future, and he said that because of the bone loss, it was likely that I could lose further teeth in the future. As you can imagine, as I walked away from the dentist, my mind started to spiral out of all control. If I was to have a permanent gap and I could lose further teeth, it could damage my marriage to my wife. It could impact on my confidence as a leadership psychologist and speaker. Worst of all, I was booked in for this TEDx talk with you all today that I feared then I'd either have to pull out of or I'd have to do it as the gap-toothed speaker. Adversity had struck, and within minutes, my mind had gone into survival mode. I couldn't see a way forward with regards to what I was going to do about my teeth. It felt hopeless. Okay, so I know that most of you out there will hopefully not have the problems that I'm talking about with teeth and relate to that story. But I know for sure that you'll all have been through those situations where your thinking can spiral out of control. It could be the boiler breaking down at home on a cold winter's morning. It could be a big mistake at work. It could be the horror of one of your social media posts not getting any likes. To understand all this further, I want to take you back to a time when nobody was remotely bothered about flossing their teeth or dental extractions. 2 million years ago, the origins of the Homo species were roaming the African savanna. Survival was always key to the origins of our species, as it is for us. But they were very much focused on physical survival and threats like saber-toothed tigers. Now, over time, evolution has been slow, and the Homo sapien brain has increased in size and complexity. But the modern Homo sapien brain is now trying to make sense of an incredibly complicated world with some primitive parts and functioning. In modern life, it's still about survival, but we're less preoccupied with physical survival and the threats of saber-toothed tigers. In modern life, we are monitoring for potential threats, but often these are threats to our self-esteem, to our relationships, to our happiness. A bit like that story I was telling about my teeth. We go inwards and we look for areas where we may be vulnerable or weak, fearing that we will be found out to be not good enough in different aspects of our lives. The modern day threats are more psychological in nature. So when we're monitoring for potential threats and adversity, whether they be physical or psychological, sometimes we get the size of it about right. There are other occasions where we distort adversity into a different shape. And there are also times when we take potential adversity and exaggerate it significantly. Worse still, we can imagine threats and adversity that never even existed in the first place. This is what was happening the day that I walked away from that dentist, particularly in relation to exaggeration. Adversity had struck, and my mind had spiraled out of control. I found it difficult to think rationally, and my creativity was blocked. It's interesting to look at what is going on physiologically here. This wonderful organ, the human brain, that is capable of so much, can also be our worst enemy. When potential adversity strikes, information initially goes directly first to the emotional center of the brain, called the amygdala. This bypasses the more rational, logical thinking part of the brain, called the cerebral cortex. Renowned neuroscientist Joseph Adu calls this the quick and dirty route, and it's activated incredibly quickly. The emotional center of our brain then triggers a number of changes. Our blood pressure increases. Our field of sight becomes narrowed. We secrete adrenaline and cortisol. And most importantly, our brain frequency increases, which is known through neuroscience to reduce our capability to think creatively. When we are triggered emotionally in situations, could be doing a TEDx talk in front of 100 people, our focus becomes narrowed. Our thinking becomes darker and more constricted. We don't think rationally because our system becomes overloaded. And our creativity becomes blocked. I want to share a story with you all now that I think that you will all relate to, even if not the specifics. I was talking to an entrepreneur last year, and he said that when he had his business, whenever the phone went in the office, he feared it was their biggest client who would be cancelling their contract. And when they did that, other clients would find out, they would cancel their contracts as well. It would end up that he would lose his business through bankruptcy, he would lose his home, and his marriage would be lost through this as well. This spiraling thinking was happening in seconds. But it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? That we all go through these spiraling thought processes often. So how can you move from this place and access your rational thinking, creative thinking in these moments? To do this, you need to use the ability known to be more heightened in the human being than any other species on the planet. That is the ability to consciously observe your own thinking and be able to choose and shift your thinking. To move from adversity to creativity will be enabled for you by the 3 following steps. First of all, creativity needs space. Creativity needs space, quiet, and a break in time. You need to remove yourself from the situation in which you've been hijacked to find a quieter space, both physically and quite a headspace as well. For you, this might mean going out for a walk in the garden, going to a different location. It could be meditating. It could be having a bath or a shower. It could be that just deep breathing. That felt good. Is the first place to start to release yourself from the hijacking that's been taking place through your survival thinking. Secondly, creativity needs you to flip from a reactive state to a proactive state. Whatever it was that triggered you emotionally, you need to find a calmer space, and you then, with that space, need to start to gather your thoughts about why it is that you feel so threatened. This is part of moving from the reactive to proactive state, where you can then engage rational thought and start to have a better look at the facts of the situation. Could have been an email that triggered you, a person, an experience like mine. but then start to capture ideas on your solutions. Could be that you contact a friend or somebody you know who's had similar experiences for the benefit of their wisdom. But this is all about moving from the reactive state, triggered by your survival thinking, to a proactive state. Third step is that creativity needs you to make conscious choices. It's then about weighing up those options, looking at their risks, their pros and cons, and making a decision. If the situation is more complex, know that you can make a decision and move forwards. And if that doesn't work out, you can choose another path in the future and find a further solution. But make the best decision for you now, and do not let your survival thinking keep you stuck or frozen in a place of indecision. Those 3 steps will take you out of the tunnel created by your survival thinking and open you up to creativity. It's not about that famous phrase that I imagine many of you have heard before, feel the fear and do it anyway. It's about understanding the fear first. So what about that story about my tooth? When I got back from the dentist, I went outside into the garden and I just did some deep breathing to bring myself to a calmer state, both physically and psychologically. I found space. I then went inside and I got my notebook out and I just captured some thoughts about why I felt so threatened by this situation and why I was getting it all out of perspective. I then started to note down some ideas about what I felt could be done to move forwards. I contacted one of my really good friends who'd had problems with his teeth in the past for the benefit of his experience. I moved from reactive to proactive. I then looked at the solutions I'd got down on paper and started to evaluate them based on pros, cons, risks, and potential financial cost. I then rang my dental surgery and said, I've decided I want to see an expert dental surgeon to get an implant. And I also booked a regular quarterly appointment with a hygienist to mitigate against future problems with my teeth. So that was me making my own choices. Even though I'd been hijacked by my survival thinking, those 3 steps enabled me to gain control, and it felt brilliant. And on November the 15th last year, I had this implant fitted, so I was ready for this TEDx talk with all you wonderful people here today. And you know, I realized and reflected that just like so many of those situations that get blown out of all proportion by survival thinking, it was never that big of a deal anyway. I want to leave you with some important thoughts. Our survival thinking kicks in to keep us safe. It will always do that. We're continually monitoring for potential threats and danger, but often this goes inwards and we look for areas where we feel weak and vulnerable. We all do this, but it can hijack us and it can be completely irrational. Our survival thinking will distort, exaggerate, and imagine problems that never even existed. When that happens, it narrows down our thinking and it blocks our creativity. But taking those 3 steps, finding space, flipping from reactive to proactive, making conscious choices, will enable us all to assess any perceived adversity from a place of rationality and find a creative way forwards. As I said before, it's not about feeling the fear and doing it anyway. It's about understanding the fear first and then moving forwards. And most importantly, it will help us all realize that a threat that we've made as big as a scary saber-toothed tiger was in fact just this: a problem with a tooth that could be easily solved creatively if we get out of survival mode. Thank you very much.